Sleepers. Written by Stephen Landry. Narrated by Stephen Garnett. The fire from my match flickered in the middle of the night as you woke up next to me, screaming. It felt almost as if time itself had slowed to a halt. Already we had been married for a week, and it seemed nothing could stop us. Your eyes had turned a pasty white that night as your small, petite and fragile limbs cracked as you stood waist up in our bed. Your jaw stood crooked as you slowly tilted your head, studying the room around you. The room was yours, just as it had always been. Zombie and fantasy posters hung on the wall, lit by a black light you kept running 24/7. Your brother and I tried our best to keep it the same for you, before you fell away from us, into the dreaming. 2/3 of the Earth's population went to sleep, but not before delivering a message. Some told it in tongues, while others spoke in dead languages no one could understand. You were one of the few that said it clear as day. I will never forget it. Your voice as it cracked and groaned as your eyes met mine, and I tried my best to wake you, hoping you were only experiencing a night terror, or that this whole thing has been a part of some bad dream. I failed, and all I could do was listen as you repeated again and again, "We are coming." 5 years have passed since the day of your possession, and now you lay still in a coma aboard the Earth's first starship. You rest quietly in stasis as your brother, not much older than I, along with 1,000 more survivors, begin our deceleration toward what we have christened the Lamia, a demon warship. 5 years we have prepared for this day. This, our final stand against the demons, ever since they announced their arrival. 5 years ago, everything changed when you entered the dreaming. But that wasn't all. I can still remember the fire burning around the edge of the match as if the world had begun to move in slow motion. Time itself slowed to a halt around me. I felt my heart beat faster and stronger than ever. I thought maybe it was adrenaline, or the anxiety. All I wanted in that moment was to protect you. Before your mouth stopped moving, I felt a power awaken inside me, and I knew you weren't the only one that had changed that night. Days after you slept, the world went crazy. Riots broke out across the world. Everyone was trying to interpret the message. Some said it was the beginning of the end. Priests took to the streets, and all over the world a fire of prayer ignited. The National Guard took to the streets as well, and martial law was soon declared. NASA and several space agencies came on air and announced something that no one had seen coming. They had been tracking an unnatural object to the edge of our solar system. Days before the possession, they had detected a signal from it. The signal, similar to radio waves, spread across the Earth. Everyone at some point had contact with it. We'd all been exposed to something alien, something sinister. Many that fell died in their sleep. Committees were formed with volunteers searching for and rescuing the bodies of the dreaming. In the first year, scientists formed a new agency called Keone. They dedicated their time to preserving the bodies of the dreaming, many of whom were starving, as the last of us did everything we could to take care of them. Keone developed the stasis chambers that froze the dreaming, while NASA and other space agencies began working with military around the world to build a ship that could intercept the alien object, hoping maybe there was a way to find a cure. By the second year, it worked. Built on the backbone of the M drive, a project NASA had been secretly working on for years. All the pieces were falling into place, and the first drones were sent into space. They had 4 directives. 1. Hold still. No sudden movements. 2 things will happen. They will welcome us and want to learn from us, or they will see us as a threat and attack us. Whatever the hell is on board is far more advanced than anything we can imagine. 2. Find a medium to communicate through. They will not speak our language, though they may be able to read our thoughts. Each drone we have programmed to try multiple different ways of communication, from mathematics and music to art and binary. 3. Be humble. Do not let your own feelings or beliefs cloud you. 4. Do not act hostile. Any act of hostility could be interpreted as declaring war. For all we know, they are the same as us, or perhaps they are just a group of refugees who have lost their planet. At the same time, they could be explorers, or it could even be some kind of prison ship. Nothing is off the table. Have an open mind, but do not engage unless absolutely necessary. This is it. A moment in history that will be remembered forever in time. Not long after intercepting the object, which was slowly moving closer and closer to Earth, drifting through the darkness of space like a derelict freighter, our ship let loose 1,000 drones, each about the size of a man. In that one night, the drones were destroyed. Black figures with white porcelain teeth that glowed fluorescent in the dark tore through the metal drones. The figures looked like demons. Many of them resembled Baphomet, however, rather than a goat-like head, it was something more deformed. They were bipedal, with wings and tails. Their bodies were strong enough to withstand the cold vacuum of space, and they moved like feral animals, using a magnetic field that surrounded their starship to move like sharks through water. What the world saw that day changed everything. The monsters of hell were real. Scientists theorized that many of the possessions throughout human history could have been caused by the same signal that hit the earth that night you fell away from me. The demons have been slowly embedding themselves into our consciousness as something for us to fear for thousands of years. Further studies showed that the derelict vessel they were using to drift towards us was damaged. The demons had been at war with someone else, and they were running. We had no idea what they were coming to us for. We weren't even sure at first if they were truly hostile. Then, the second message arrived. A small portion of the dreaming that wasn't in stasis woke up. Their minds were gone. They were infected. We called them the Withered. They attacked with rage and hate, and by the time we managed to take back control, the demons had sent us another message, one that said we were to bow to our new kings. Never in my life had I been more glad that you lay frozen, asleep. I prayed that you were dreaming of something better, a better world, one with you and I, your family, our friends. A world that was at peace. Eventually, your brother and I joined the infantry. A new division of the military was created to deal with the demons. They called themselves the UED, aka United Earth Defense. Funded by Keone and various governments, the UED enlisted civilians like myself and your brother Michael, who were chosen. We did it so that we could protect you. It had been 3 years since the day you went into the dreaming. V, how I miss you every day. How many hours of the day have I sat by your side waiting for you to wake up, hoping that you could hear me, wondering what it was you were dreaming. 3 years was how long it took before our gifts appeared. Some said if they were demons, then there must be angels. They called us the Chosen. Those that had contact with the dreaming moments after their possession had contracted side effects that made us special. For some, it was better eyesight, hearing, strength. For others, it was as if we'd been given superpowers. When my adrenaline started pumping, time seemed to slow to a halt. My mind moved faster than those around me. I could practically dodge a bullet when my heart raced fast enough. That same year, a part of the demon ship broke apart and accelerated towards the Earth, impacting near Paris, France. Smaller ships impacted near Chicago, Mexico City, Brazil, and Okinawa, Japan. The demons descended upon all of Europe, and we had finally gone to war. You, your brother and I, barely made it out of Chicago. We made a deal with our commanding officers that to protect you, we would join the crew of the UED Perseverance, a starship equipped with an M drive built by a joint coalition between the US and Chinese government. The first real starship. Last year, we left Earth, and we've been preparing for this moment ever since. 1,000 chosen against a horde of demons. It seems the war between heaven and hell, the end of the world, that silly idea we always joked and wrote stories about, had finally come to pass. Jake. First Class. I am 27 years old and dreaming of a forest. We're camping in the woods. Myself, you, your brother, a few of our friends. We are sitting around the campfire laughing, roasting marshmallows. Michael, your brother, is strumming his guitar. A vintage Ibanez Artcore AF-53. He's playing random melodies. No real song. I'm not sure he even knows any real songs. It's more therapy than anything else. He just strums whatever comes to his mind, moving his hands over the frets like he's been doing this all his life. He only started to learn guitar a few years ago. You look me in the eyes and smile. V, your blue eyes, your black short hair. I memorize your figure, just a few inches shorter than I am. I memorize your tattoos, the flower on your wrist. You are only a few years younger than I am, but you are far more mature than even most people my age. Just recently you had begun an apprenticeship with a sculptor. Art had always been your passion, inspiring others. You were going to change the world. I wake up to the smell of smoke. The fire alarm sounds. A piercing screech takes hold of me, and I rise instantly out of bed, grabbing my pants and jacket. I place my hands over my ears and look through the dark. I can see the little red light of the fire alarm blinking on the other side of the room. I think about calling out to make sure that anyone else in my barracks that might be asleep rises, but fortunately, I am already the last to wake. Michael and Todd have already made their way outside when I push my way through the door in a flurry of motion that makes me feel sick to my stomach. The entire barracks are on fire. I fall to the ground as a small explosion on the second floor sprays glass and wall across the concrete field I have found myself laying on. I try to imagine I'm in your arms. I try to remember my dream, to hold on to it as long as possible before the nightmare that is my reality takes me. This is no campfire. I am not surrounded by our friends. In the freezing air, I look up and see a thin white trail of smoke reaching up to the sky above me. It's midnight. "Emily had another nightmare," Michael says, picking me up off the cold concrete ground. Snow begins to fall around us. Sometimes I forget we have been training in Alaska. It's a different kind of cold. How I miss the comfortable cold weather of home. Chicago. I wish it hadn't have been one of the first cities taken by the demons. It takes only a few minutes for the emergency rescue services and fire department to appear. They begin to smother the fire. An officer named Ed quickly makes his way inside, wearing as much flame-resistant gear as he can. Moments later, he carries out a young girl, Emily, the fire starter. I want to start crying. A part of me wonders if she is dead, but this isn't the first time this has happened. "This is the third time now," says Todd, a young man about my age with thick black hair and glasses. He was one of the few among us I had kind of become friends with. "Least she didn't go supernova," said another. "That hasn't happened since before training began. She's learned how to use her powers quite a bit since then," said Todd. I stood there in silence, watching our barracks burn. "Is everyone out?" I heard one of the older officers yell. We weren't military. Well, not quite. We were members of the UED, United Earth Defense. Each of us gifted with unique powers since the event. We were being trained at a base in North Alaska to utilize our powers for combat purposes in preparation for war against the demons. Many of us had already seen combat in Europe and parts of North America. Michael and myself had barely made it out of Chicago with you. V, Michael's sister, my fiancée, actually my wife. We married a week before the event. We carried you out of the city hours before the military dropped a nuke on top of it. Chicago became an irradiated wasteland. The first city in the States to fall to the demons. At this point, that was only a few months ago. "Everyone is out. Put the fire out," said the UED commanding officer on site. The UED officer was Ed. He laid Emily's body down on the ground. Her body was still smouldering, her skin covered in blisters under her charred clothes, as if she herself had second and third degree burns covering her from head to toe. Slowly, her skin began to heal as she opened her eyes. Tears began to fall as she threw her arms around Ed and began sobbing uncontrollably. Bran, another soldier about my age who came in to train with both Michael and I around the same time, looked at the burning building. He whispers a word, some kind of prayer. I watch in silence as he inhales a deep breath of air. His mouth seems to open an enormous length as he sucks in the air around him. Just as quickly as he inhales, he exhales, and a wave of wind moves across the barracks, putting the fire out in an instant. The wind hits the barracks so hard it cracks the concrete. Not a trace of the fire remains. "Emily, are you okay?" I ask as we move towards her. Ed is still holding her tight, hugging her as she sobs away in his arms. Ed is more or less our teacher. He has no powers of his own. He volunteered to take responsibility for us. In some ways, we are all orphans. Most of our loved ones are in the dreaming. He was a decorated naval officer. From what I heard, he commanded an entire ship and fought in 3 wars overseas before the day of the dreaming. The event, it seemed, affected certain areas of the world far worse than others. Much of Europe and Asia and the Middle East were devastated as millions fell into the dreaming, never to wake up. The United States military used it to hit as many primary targets as possible. Dictators fell asleep and never woke up, as did many politicians. Practically anyone with too many enemies were as good as dead. Our own vice president was even caught inside the dreaming. Power plants shut down and oil pipelines exploded as operators fell asleep at their desks. Radiation leaked and fires burned across the Middle East, as well as many parts of China, Japan, and the United States. The day of the dreaming, the National Guard took to the streets and secured as much of the country as possible. We went days without power, without electricity, without any idea of what was going on. I can still remember holding you in my arms, just as Ed held Emily now, begging God to tell me everything was going to be fine, praying that you would wake up, that you would smile, that your hand would move. "I did it again. I'm so sorry," Emily cried. "It's not your fault, honey. Don't cry. We got everyone out in time. There is nothing to worry about. We all knew this could happen any time." "You must not feel bad," Ed said, comforting her. Slowly, all of us took a knee beside her, holding out our hands and placing them near her. I stop breathing, and I feel my heart bumping in my chest. Bump, bump, bump. I open my eyes and look at Emily. I reach out to touch her. My adrenaline is kicking in. Time moves slow. I recall, remembering that first day. 3 years since you entered the dreaming. A heavy hand throws me to the ground. Michael and I had been at camp not even an hour. I was inside the mess hall. I'd already gone about a day without eating, and Ed, who had picked the 3 of us, Michael, you and myself, up from Ann Arbor, Michigan, had told me that was my first assignment. The man that threw me to the ground was named Blair. He had been at the camp 2 weeks, and had designated himself the class bully. Gifted with incredible strength, Blair could punch a hole through a wall and not feel a thing. If you hadn't already guessed, getting thrown to the ground by him hurt like hell. My gift was simple enough. When my adrenaline pumped, time seemed to slow down. I wasn't as cool as the Flash or Quicksilver. It wasn't as if time was actually slowing down. I wasn't in the Matrix, bending backwards, dodging bullets. It was just the way my mind perceived reality. I saw Blair's fist heading straight for me. It felt like I spent hours trying to figure out which way to move, how to counter him. My power made it possible that I could work my way out of almost any situation. Except this one. I moved backwards, but not enough. Blair hit me right in the side of the face, nearly dislocating my jaw, and he was holding back. "You're going to have to do better than that if you're going to have my back against the demons," he said. He let me go after that. Blair had lost everyone in Chicago. His family, his friends, everyone that meant anything to him. The day the demons came to Earth, he took the offensive, trying his best to take as many down as possible. But when they kept coming, he retreated to the outskirts of the city. He watched as the bombs fell, the city decimated. I couldn't blame him in a way. He was here for vengeance, to grow stronger so that he could face the demons again. I sat next to Bran, who showed me his gift by blowing a paper football across the room towards Todd, who held his fingers like a goal. He filled me in on Blair. Even knowing what I know now, I'm still pissed he hit me that first day. There were 8 of us with powers that came to Alaska. 8 of us that would be trained as a team to fight against the demons. We were one of hundreds of camps all across the world, separated for safety against any alien attacks. All of us would train with 7 others until the UED was ready to launch the Perseverance, a starship that would take all of us, including you and everyone else who had loved ones in the dreaming, cared for in stasis, towards the demon ship. There, we would use our weapons and ships designed by several chosen who had been gifted with advanced intelligence to fight back against the demons. There, we would make our final stand. Myself, with the powers to slow time. Michael, who had the power to mimic the powers of others. Blair and his super strength. Emily, the fire starter. Bran, the whirlwind. Todd, who could manipulate matter with his mind, though only a limited amount of time before he would become weak. Jackson, super eyesight and hearing. He was here on loan from a state prison. Apparently he was one of a few hundred inmates that were given time off their sentence for serving in the UED. I never asked what he was in for. All I knew and all I needed to know was that he was grateful he had been given a second chance. Last but not least was Nate, with his hyper-intelligence. He was barely around us, as he was almost always working with the UED to develop a new batch of energy weapons we could use against the demons. I was grateful. When Nate was around, he had an ego the size of a small country. Powers. The first few weeks after the event were the worst. We were living in a small townhouse with your brother in Chicago. I was working as a developer on an independent video game about zombies rising from the dead. You were doing your apprenticeship, and your brother was working as a mechanic downtown. I can still remember all the silly pieces of art I made. Each and every time, creating monsters inspired from the back of my mind, nightmares I would have. Creating creatures described to me by others. Who would have imagined we would be face to face with such monstrosities in our lifetime? After the event, many philosophers, mostly bloggers and storytellers, began posting articles and making headlines telling the public that the nightmares were real, that the demons had in fact been hacking into the subconscious minds of humanity since ancient times, sending noise across space as they made their way towards our little blue dot. We had no idea why they were coming for us. It didn't matter. I felt like I lost everything when you didn't wake up. When emergency services finally made their way to our home and told us what was happening. When I sat by you in the hospital, exercising your legs so you wouldn't lose muscle while you slept in a comatose state. I was there when they inserted a feeding tube inside you so that you wouldn't starve. When they gave us our protein blocks because crops and farms around the world were depleting their resources without any manpower, I starved for days, blending my food so that you could stay healthy and strong. Many died in the streets. Homeless that fell asleep in alleys never had a chance. Dead bodies in the sewers. The smell ran rapid through the streets. Roaches and rats fed off the dead. 2/3, or rather 0.666666 of the Earth's population fell into the dreaming, and less than half of that survived the first 6 months. We just didn't have the resources to take care of everyone. Mass graves were created where we mourned the dead. We were lucky. So unbelievably lucky. The emergency services let us go back to our home after several weeks and would periodically check on you and your condition. Michael and I worked with several of the non-profits to get food to those who couldn't afford the rising prices that choked the economy to death. The entire world fell into a depression. Strategists and politicians worked day and night to come up with a new system of credit that would replace the old. The dreaming that couldn't get the help they needed continued to die. Several gangs formed throughout the United States, looting and moving themselves inside the empty, condemned homes of the rich. Violence spread, and martial law was declared. It took another 6 months before things started to feel normal again. "With great power comes," said some random newscaster on the television before it shut itself off. "We lost power again," Michael said, looking over towards me. I was sitting by your side, drawing in a moleskin sketchbook you had bought me years before. It was nearly filled now, mostly portraits. I started to draw less scary things and focused more on the reality around me. I felt like I was a record keeper. Each time I moved the charcoal, tracing out the eyes of someone I had known or seen on the streets, I felt like I was making history. Someday, you would wake up, and I would tell you about the doctor who I drew that took care of you, the nurse that fed you, the older woman who died of old age beside you. Each portrait was a story ready to be told. We had a hospital bed moved in with us not long after we left the hospital. At this point, nearly a year had gone by since the event. Your condition hadn't changed, but the world was starting to put itself back together. "What are you working on?" asked Michael, looking over my shoulder. "It's one of the nurses at the non-profit. You know the one that had the daughter with the hots for you?" I answered. "Yeah, if only all the cute ones were awake," he laughed. The nurse I was drawing was in her late 40s. Someone whose daughter was about our age had fallen asleep. Michael and her had been friends before the event. "All the beautiful ones were taken away," I said, staring at your face. "You know, I still get kinda nauseous when I hear you talk about my sister, or see you look at her like that," said Michael. "Well, if we didn't live together," I replied. "Not going there," he said. I had thought several times about moving out on my own, hoping that I could move you out to the country and find a better way to take care of you. There was also Cambridge in Massachusetts. MIT was looking for volunteers to experiment on and research. They were hoping to forcefully wake people up. Some recent stories said they managed a few successful attempts. However, the patients died soon after, mumbling and talking in tongues. I would trade places with you in a heartbeat, tear out my tongue just so you could speak again. I knew Michael was right. There was no way I would sign you up for any of those whack job experiments. I wasn't going to risk losing you, and neither was he. We were stuck. "You know I'm not going to leave," I said. Michael smiled. "How about you draw something goofy like a cartoon? Maybe you could make a webcomic or do something that would do some good in this world, like make people laugh," he said. "Tried that, remember? It just felt wrong," I replied. With so much wrong in the world, it seemed strange drawing cartoons or trying to make something funny. I had always been a pretty serious person. I mostly preferred my art dark, like the works of H.R. Geiger or Zadislav Beksinski. I also loved the surreal art of Yaroslav Yaskanovsky and Hota Lial. I felt like that was the world I was living in now, a world unlike anything anyone could have imagined. The world didn't end with a zombie apocalypse. It didn't end with nuclear bombs, not yet anyway, or Nazis from the moon. It ended with the world falling asleep. I was living out the pages of a dystopian novel. The world had fallen to shit and was on a downward spiral. No, slowly. There had to be a cure. There was always a way around. Even magic had to have limits. We knew about the object in deep space. Plans were set in motion to investigate it. Drones nearly a month away would investigate. The dreaming and the object went hand in hand. We knew that. All of Earth knew that. A sound outside. Like a ringing. No, a screeching. Like nails against a chalkboard. Like a banshee screaming. Half the neighbourhood was out of their homes. Michael grabbed a gun he had gotten his hands on not long after the event. Luckily, the sound came from a park over a mile away, and he wouldn't need to use it. He was predetermined to keep you, me, and everyone he loved safe, no matter what the cost. With the world falling into chaos, I couldn't blame him. He taught me to shoot that summer, telling me should anything happen when he wasn't around, I had to be ready. I can still remember the first time I felt the kickback from the small handgun in my hand, the feeling of dust, the residue left over from firing again and again that covered my hand and my wrist, the smell of gunpowder that lingered even after I washed. I felt like we had become doomsday preppers. We even had a basement filled with canned goods and gallons of water. It was the middle of the day. The power came back on. It was the news. A helicopter was flying around the middle of a small park. 2 men were fighting. Well, more like one was beating the other. One man was wearing a long trench coat, while the other looked like he was dressed like a lawyer. The one with the trench coat looked like a supervillain you would see on TV. Half his face was burned, and his hair was dark grey. He had dragged the one man out to the centre of the park. He was looking for an audience, calling out to the police that surrounded him. What happened next changed the world. Later incident reports would call him Reaper. Dress like a supervillain, get a supervillain nickname, I guess. His real name had been Devon Jones. Before the event, he lost his wife and child in a house fire. Apparently, faulty wires were to blame. He tried to get money from the company that built his home, only to lose the case in court. Seemed the judge was paid off. The case never made it to a jury and was buried. He lost everything. His wife, his child, his home. He was living on the streets when the event happened. He was staying at a shelter. He woke up, surrounded by dozens that had entered inside the dreaming. The man he dragged out to the centre of the park had been the lawyer that worked for the faulty home company. Devon lifted him up by the neck and drained the life out of him. The lawyer became old, right before the eyes of the world. The police fired, killing the Reaper in an instant, but not before the world saw what happened. This was the first televised case, but not the first time powers had appeared. The first recorded incident was actually a little girl in Brazil. She discovered that she could push people with her mind. After the Reaper incident, however, people got scared. Fear of the unknown crept in. The United States was still under martial law, and soon enough, more heroes and villains began to appear. At times it seemed like a joke. Vigilantes took to the streets defending the poor. I remember hearing stories about Chosen that emulated favourite comic book heroes. Some even set up protective camps where people could find shelter. When the villains started doing the same thing, only to sacrifice those they had taken in, did people begin to get really afraid. No one knew who could be trusted and who couldn't. Paranoia swept the world. Anyone with a gift was outcasted, reported to the military, taken away. This was also about the time the UED was officially established. Sometimes people got their powers at random. Someone could be sitting in a cafe, and the next thing you know, they go supernova. That's what happened to Emily. She was writing at her favourite coffee shop. A steampunk story set in space, something she had once dreamt of publishing. She wrote it now, just hoping that somehow it would bring hope to those who suffered in the world. She was taking a sip of a mocha frappa with a double shot of espresso when she caught fire. First she screamed. The fire tore away at her skin, bulging and blistering until she fell to her knees, and a wave burned everything 30 yards around her. The cafe was destroyed, and anyone inside was burned to a crisp. By the time emergency services arrived on scene, she was completely unconscious, laying half naked in burned clothes. Her skin had already begun healing back. She was the first taken in by Ed. Rather than tie her in chains inside some military lab, she was brought to Alaska to learn how to control her new gift. There was something magical about everyone that had powers, something that couldn't be studied, something about their energy and aura. The surreal had become reality. A month later, the first anniversary of the event occurred. A few weeks after that, our drones met the object in deep space. The ship. The demons. The world watched in horror as some, a small portion of those that slept, began to wake. The demons had delivered a message. They were coming for us. They demanded we bow to them as our new kings, our new masters. Their second attack began. The sleeping rose as the withered. "So, the zombie apocalypse has finally come," said Michael. He had just gunned down one of the dreaming that awoke next door. "It killed Susan," I said, staring at her dead body laid out on the front yard. "Just thank God V didn't wake up to be a part of this," he said, aiming down the sight of his handgun and taking another shot at another withered. Withered. You would think the end of the world would happen quickly. One moment there would be the world, and the next, nothing. We weren't that lucky. The withered attacked and killed many of the survivors, but in this case, the end of the world only lasted a few weeks. Many of them were captured, test subjects for the military. Even weapons released in third world countries, where war was still raging. Nobody called them zombies, though that was exactly what we were all thinking. This was just like that horrible episode of that one TV show we all used to watch. "Another down," said Michael. We had barricaded ourselves inside the house. We were being hunted by the withered. At this point, we updated our arsenal to AR-15s and machetes over handguns and knives. The AR-15s were given to us by a man named Niles that lived less than half a block from us. He was one of those people, the kind that keeps a basement full of guns and ammo. He had been a ranger at one time, though he was starting to show his age now. He personally trained us and taught us how to be safe with our weapons. He had just moved into town a few weeks before the event. He was hoping to be closer to his daughter, whom he had been estranged from for many years. She was one like you, who had fallen into the dreaming. Unlike you, she didn't survive. She had a heart condition and didn't make it through the first few months. Many with physical problems like her couldn't be saved. "They seem drawn to us," I said. "Probably trying to get to V. Maybe something to do with the fact that she's dreaming. Maybe it's some kind of signal," he answered. "That makes sense. How many dreaming are there in our neighbourhood?" I asked. 28 last time I checked, but half have turned withered and the rest are unaccounted for. I tried to reach the hospital, but the phone lines are jammed. I thought they had the relay working, but phones are still having signal issues, Michael said. Ever since the event, phones had been working about half their normal time. The military took control of the cell towers and kept the lines open and satellites in orbit. It was the worst way to get unlimited data, but it was a free service we all had. Most likely they only did it so that they could keep tabs on everyone, but I wasn't complaining. It made life a little easier. Another thing that made life easier, and you may find this strange, but I still had every text and picture the two of us had ever shared. Every message since before the first day we met. That day at the creek. The two of us talking as we made our way down a small hill in a state park. The day we felt the water as it fell across a small dam that had been built just a few years before. Messages of our favourite movies. Pictures we found and sent one another online. Smileys and emojis. A list of every dream we ever had, and hundreds of messages that spoke of all the millions of things we were going to do. The places we planned to travel. Pictures from our day at the zoo, our trip to the city. Pictures of Halloween and Thanksgiving. Video calls that came and went. Michael was right that day. The withered were attracted to the dreaming. Nate was a part of the team that detected it. He was one of the first with emerging powers. Once, he was a below-average student, and now he could earn a degree in less than a week. He knew his best bet was to come clean and find the people in charge as soon as possible. Unfortunately for him, the first thing he did was join a gang, aka the Kings of Wisconsin. Nate was a genius, but he lacked street smarts. He thought joining one of the most powerful gangs in Wisconsin, his hometown, would give him an edge. He would help them take territory, plotting behind the scenes while they acted out his orders. After 3 days, he was stuck. The leader threatened his family and made Nate slave like a dog. When he heard about the UED, he came up with a plan to lead the Kings into an ambush. They gathered their dreaming in one place, a church on the north side of town. Nate fended them off with a bolt gun made out of PVC pipes and wire. The Withered overpowered the Kings, just as the UED stepped in, taking military action. Nate soon introduced himself to Ed, and the two hit it off real quick. Nate came to Alaska after making sure his family was relocated to Cambridge. Not an easy task, as the Withered were beginning to overtake small towns such as his. "Another gang is moving in," said an older man on a walkie. It was our neighbour, Niles. "How big? Are they heavily armed?" I asked. Michael and I had been working with several others to keep our neighbourhood safe from gangs and raiders for several days. The gangs were moving away from territory that contained many dreaming and withered, and making their way into smaller suburbs, stealing food. "Why does it seem when shit hits the fans, humans have to be such shits?" said Niles. He took another shot. We could hear the gunfire echo throughout the street. It was over in just a few minutes. "Lucky for us, we're the worst of them," said Niles, laughing. He had killed several members of the gang that was beginning to move in. "We need those supplies," said Michael. "They were in a track. I took out the driver and hit a pole. I took out 4 of them before they even got a shot off. Took out the last 2 as they were running away. There was another car, but it drove back the way they came. I don't think we have to worry. Didn't seem like they figured out where the shots were coming from. Gonna need to burn the bodies too," said Niles. "You are one sick fuck, you know that, right? We still have to try and call this in. We're under martial law, we are animals. There is still a city we have to try and save," said Michael. "Every man, woman and child for themselves out here. Downtown is full swing. It's a disco party for the undead. Full of Withered, and that so-called military is forcing the gangs out our way, so screw 'em," Niles replied. We did things his way, but not by choice. The dreaming weren't the only thing the Withered were attracted to. The bodies of the dead attracted them just as much, if not more. We learned in the first few days we had to quickly burn the bodies of the dead. "The fact they eat dead totally makes them the Z word," I said. "Don't say it," said Michael. "Why not? Everyone is thinking it," I replied, as we packed up the last of the food and water the truck was transporting. "It's just not right. It doesn't feel right. Imagine if Fee woke up like that. Imagine it had been her. I couldn't believe it when I shot the dreaming next door. She was human. She was just the same as us once," Michael said. He had made a good point. I hadn't shot any of the Withered. He had already killed more than I could count at this point. Each time I could see a part of him slipping away. He was losing himself. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to comfort him. Michael was the closest thing to family I had besides you. "I just wanted to wake up. I have done everything I can my whole life to protect my family. Yeah, I may have messed up here and there, but I have given this my best shot. Money, time, energy, everything to make things right, to make things good. It's not fair," he said. I should have given him a hug, but instead I sat there in silence. We stood next to each other for about half an hour before finally heading back home to drop off our supplies. First we had to make our way to Niles. We were going to drop off some water and food for him. "I'm glad you weren't awake to see what happened next." I can still remember the smell of the stale air mixed with copper as I opened the door to his home and crept my way inside. The lock on the door had been broken. Michael and I raised our handguns. We found a withered, hunched over, gnawing at Niall's neck. He was dead. The withered had been severely injured, but that hadn't stopped it. It must have caught him by surprise. I'm not sure if I killed it or Michael did. Either way, it felt wrong. I felt for the first time what Michael had been feeling since the withered first appeared. The guilt in killing them. The fear they would jump right back up and bite. The fear they were not really dead, that there was a cure, and that by firing at them you were taking away any hope that they might be saved. "There are several things that have happened now that have gotten us here," began Ed. "First, the daydreaming. All of you were, and still are, close to someone that fell asleep that day. One of the reasons we have given consent to take them with us is that Nate and several others here believe that there is a link between your powers and the dreaming, and we don't want you to possibly lose those powers when we reach our primary target. Second, the UED's formation as a result of the powers that began to emerge, and the second attack that birthed the withered. Third, but not least, the day the first demons came to Earth." Invasion. I believe in God, but not as one thing, not as an old man in the sky. I believe that what people call God is something in all of us. I believe that what Jesus and Muhammad and Buddha and all the rest said was right. It's just that the translations have gone wrong. John Lennon. John Lennon, the legend. He should have said, "I believe in God, but I know the devil is real." He is not one thing, he is many. He is not an old man, nor a young man. He is a power that has come from the sky. Lucifer, Mephisto, Satan, all the names are real. The devil has come for all of us. And if there is a devil, demons, there is definitely a God. Nate, UED Intelligence. 3 years since you entered the dreaming. The fear of the withered only lasted a few weeks. Those that weren't shot and killed, starved or were captured by the UED, who at this time had more control over everything going on than the military. Soon, the fear crept back to those with powers. Many of the heroes that came about fought against the withered, protecting communities and towns. They were praised as heroes. The UED approached them, creating programs that utilized their talents, sending them on covert missions and missions to serve and protect the public. Many of the heroes were tools used to combat the villains that came about. Every so often you would see or hear about their escapades on the news. Each had been given a code name, some great and some not so great. Examples such as the Incredible Shadow, who claimed to be an ancient god sent to Earth to learn a lesson in humility. He was indestructible, and could manipulate light in a way that he practically turned invisible. He was overrun by withered, but remembered as a martyr. Others, such as the Mirror Mask, could generate illusions. At first, Mirror Mask used his powers unpredictably, but soon he, like many others, began standing up for those less fortunate than himself. He defended an entire hospital against the withered, and joined the UED. Many of the larger cities were designated protectors. Ms. Puma, with reflexes like that of a cat, defended her hometown in Louisiana. New Ron, who like the Incredible Shadow could manipulate light around him, defended the city of Boston, Massachusetts. The galactic Mancer, who had the power to move objects with his mind, defended several areas in both Washington State and Oregon. Point is, the world was changing. Heroes were coming forward that the public could look up to. The media milked it. Bloggers loved it. Soon, every kid on the street was hoping one day they would have powers. Others reviled them, wishing the UED would put them all down, wondering how the heroes would protect the cities when the demons themselves drifted at the edge of our solar system. Everyone had their eye on the sky. Even those of us that tried to live normal lives were lost. I feel like I can't tell you the whole story, everything that will happen, without first telling you about the day the demons came. The day Michael and I, the day all of us, lost everything. The day we joined the UED, the day we learned we too had powers. The day of the invasion. Most days we began by feeding you through your PEG tube. I would spend the next several hours working the muscles in your arms and legs, moving you from one position to the next. There were so many risks. Many sleepers had died already from blood clots, sepsis from bed sores, muscle atrophy, bone density loss. No picnic. Only intensive nursing care kept most patients from catastrophic death. Every week we had a nurse check in with us, from emergency services as well. Being in the dreaming meant you were always one small step away from death. Without your brother and I, who knows what would have happened to you? No matter how many range of motion exercises, you kept losing weight and getting weaker. When you fell into the dreaming, you were healthy, but now you weighed just a little more than 100 pounds and had lost half your muscle mass. You were pallid, flaccid, weak, soft, loose and flabby. Not that any of that mattered. You were still the same woman I loved, the same woman I chose to marry, the same woman I had dedicated my life to, and I wasn't going to lose you. If this had been a normal day, I would have been about to take a break. I would have sipped on some home-brewed tea and began drawing while I sat next to you. I had started selling my art again. I thought maybe that would make you happy. You always loved my pictures. Michael and I needed the money, so I was taking commissions, drawing portraits of the lost for families that couldn't keep their loved ones alive. It began around 11 a.m. A massive ship came out of the sky and landed in Paris, France. Michael and I watched in terror on television as it unfolded in real time. Moments later, the entire city was overrun. The station stopped broadcasting. Hours passed with the emergency broadcast signal playing repeatedly on air. There was nothing new reported online. Most websites could not establish any kind of link, or by radio. It was like the entire world had stopped. A complete blackout across the globe. A few hours later, we saw a similar ship. A dark object that looked like an arrowhead flew over the city above us. It landed near the Willis Tower. Half the city was covered in dust. The other half was gone. The Baphomet demons quickly spread out. Within minutes they were so close we could hear them as if they were just up the street. The military and the UED were on the scene in minutes. They must have had a camp closer to the city than any of us thought. I carried you out of the house myself and placed you in the back seat of our car. We were driving a dark brown Jeep, an older model that your brother bought before you fell into the dreaming. As I buckled you in place, I could see helicopters and VTOLs flying above us. As I jumped into the back seat to help hold you, your brother hit the gas pedal to the floor. We tore out of our neighborhood. Hundreds of soldiers were pouring into the city, flying in above us. The invasion had begun. The real end of the world. We were maybe half a mile down the road before we hit our first snag. "Dropships! They have goddamn dropships!" I shouted, as a demon ship black as the night, shaped like an exotic version of our own fighter jets, came down in front of us. It looked almost like it was organic, like it had been grown from a seed. The sides had the same texture as the bark of an oak tree, though solid black. The only reason I saw it so well was that for the first time, time began to slow down. My powers were manifesting themselves. I could see the smoke roar up from the tires as your brother slammed on the brakes. I could see the glass shatter in slow motion around me as I folded my arms around you, shielding you from the shards that pressed against my skin. Small, straight cuts, like a blind surgeon had started operating on me while I was awake. I felt everything. Even the pressure in the air change as the demons jumped down from the side of their craft. They looked just as they did in space. Baphomet faces, with human-like limbs, only they carried themselves more like raptors. I could see tails protruding from their backs. They had pieces of armor sewn into their skin, more like riveted in. I could still see what looked like blood dripping down between small grooves that lined the spaces in between. They carried with them large rifles. I saw one of them fire. I wasn't sure if it had seen another human, or it was firing just for kicks. A blue bolt of energy disintegrated anything it touched. It looked like something you would see in an alien invasion film, except now I was living it. I imagined it all playing out in my head. Michael had run us into a drainage ditch. We were halfway down Harrison Street, only a half-mile away from 290. The front radiator was smashed against a piece of concrete. Behind us, the Willis Tower fell. A random rocket smacked against the alien dropship. The rocket blew sparks, but the alien ship didn't explode. It seemed as if it was protected by some kind of field. It caught them off guard. Lucky for us. We had just long enough for Michael and I to drag you out of the car and make our way inside Sonny's Bar and Grill. I remember we used to come here for drinks. You would always order a hard iced tea or something with lemon, and I always drank local. Whatever new brew the Keep would recommend. Your brother came with us a few times, here and there. He was a hardcore drinker. Whiskey, Jack, he could handle it all. I remember once, a long time ago, we used to watch the games here. Now we hid behind the bar. Even stole a few sips here and there as we waited out the demons. They were searching for us. Every once in a while we would hear them fire their energy weapons. Every once in a while we would hear the screams of those around us, as we realized we weren't the only ones hiding. Something came over Michael. I had never seen it before. His eyes became solid white, and he moved towards the entrance. We had left our guns in the car. I thought maybe he was going back for them. It seemed like suicide, but if anyone could do it, I believed it was him. From what he told me, he felt like he had lost control of his body, like some kind of entity had possessed him. He said it felt like he was moving through the shadows. One moment he felt awake, and the next he was blacking out. When he finally came to, he was holding one of the demons' energy rifles, standing over 3 of their dead bodies and a wrecked dropship that had been torn in 2. Michael's power had manifested. He could mimic those with powers as long as they were around him. He said he felt it when we ran into the ditch, when time slowed, not to the extent that it had with me, but he knew it was happening nonetheless. Apparently his power also worked with the demons. He was invisible as he made his way around them, as the world turned red and he slaughtered them with their own weapons. First, he had made quick work of their ship, drawing the 3 scouts back to investigate, and then he took care of them. When the sun finally began to set, we moved. We packed a backpack with as much food and water as we could carry. Michael brought the alien weapon with him, leaving our patriotic guns behind. Michael and I took turns carrying you, until we finally met up with a convoy, a group sent into the city by the National Guard that were helping evacuate everyone away from town as quickly as possible. They had never seen anything like it. Apparently, your brother and I were the only ones capable of touching the alien weapons without burning our hands. It was a dead giveaway that we were gifted, or rather chosen, as some others might say. The convoy immediately moved us to safety within a UED safe house. All 3 of us. They didn't disarm us, spray us down. They didn't even ask if we wanted you moved to another location. They provided us with all the support and help we needed, even a hospital bed for you to lay in. Around midnight, we were told not to look in the direction of downtown. They dropped a nuke. We were just outside the radiation zone for the moment, but we would be moving in the hours that follow to a refuge in Michigan. The next day, we signed up to be a part of the UED. We had lost everything at this point. Our home, our friends. The 3 of us were lost. Ed knew we had powers. He flat out said it when we first met. "So, what makes you kids so damn special?" We were straight. We held nothing back. We told him everything that had happened in the last 3 years. He gave us his word that you would be safe. That he would teach us to use our powers. That we were chosen, and that we would play a greater role in the war that was to come. The demon ship that drifted at the edge of the solar system was moving closer to Earth. Slowly but surely. And there would be many more days like this if nobody stood to stop them. There is no such thing as a hero. I wasn't about to put on leather or spandex and prance about like some kind of comic book character. I didn't sign up to give anyone hope. Even now I'm only doing this because defeating the demons means there is a chance I can save you. I would walk through hell to wake you up. And now I was going to prove it. If I had to choose between you and this world, damn this world and everyone in it.